Good evening, Kansas City. How y'all doing today? Good. So welcome for coming tonight. This is actually the third meeting of UXPAKC, pardon me. I can't forget those other letters, they're very important. We're very excited to have you here, and we're particularly excited to have Mr. Don Norman here with us as well. And apparently we're using the PowerPoint, so it didn't quite line up the way I was hoping, unfortunately. But we have a raffle. You're probably aware of it. Everybody who's attending tonight has already entered into it. If you really want to, you can give us another $1, and then we'll give you another ticket. But that is for 2 copies of the Design of Everyday Things, and that's 1 copy per winner. We have the vintage copy here with the classic cover, and then we have the updated and revised edition as well. So we will be drawing names for that at the end, in case you weren't aware of it. And please feel free to, if you're of the tweeting variety, persuasion, if you will, please feel free to tweet at NN Group for Nielsen Norman, also JND, 1R, UXPAKC, and those, well, they're supposed to be up in each of the corners, but I guess we'll do that for next time. I would be remiss if I didn't thank a few groups tonight. First and foremost, I would like to thank Cerner for hosting us and for supplying the beer and the pizza. Thank you very much. It's also important to note that a number of Cerner representatives here made this all possible. Will Van Norrell, not the least among them, he liaised. He liaised with many a group here and called in a few favors. So thank you very much, Will. Lindsay, I don't know where you are, but you stand, wave or something. There, that's Lindsay. I believe we also had Justin, Brian, and somebody else helping people? Micah. A lot of volunteers helping people get from the parking lot here. Yes, they're in the front row. So. Also, it's appropriate to say thank you to Nielsen Norman Group. We've been working towards this since actually the summer. So Mimi and Don have been extremely generous and supportive with their time. So with that, I'd like to introduce someone who's actually had a major impact in my life because he hired me at Sprint, and that would be Mr. Brian Landers. Brian is an independent consultant in the web and mobile voice, data, and gaming space. He previously led the product, device, and visual design team within the UX design group at Sprint. And in this role, Brian directed the design of mobile hardware and software user interfaces. He's played a strategic role in the design direction of numerous products and services, particularly within the mobile devices offered by Sprint, but also including wireless data, personalization, mobile music and video, digital media messaging, and several other Sprint wireless voice and data services. I asked Brian as a favor to introduce Dr. Norman tonight because there was a very short list of people I could think of that really knew UX cold in this area and was very comfortable with a large group. So if you'll put your hands together with me and thank Brian. And Will, I'm going to need your help switching over. So thank you. I'll see you again probably about 7:45.
All right, thank you all very much. I'm Brian, by the way. As we get Don online, I'm going to start with a little introduction, and he will be coming online shortly if he's not already. So,
small announcement from Mr. Norman. His Twitter handle is the JND1ER, and not the NN Group Twitter. So if you're tweeting, use that one.
All right, so educated in electrical engineering and psychology, Don Norman authored The Design of Everyday Things and other books furthering the field of design. He is the first professional to use user experience in a job title and has held faculty posts at Harvard, University of California, San Diego, Northwestern, KAIST, South Korea. Dr. Norman has worked in industry as a VP at Apple, an executive at HP, at several startups, and presently serves as an executive advisor for the companies while consulting as co-founder and principal of the Nielsen Norman Group. Today, Dr. Norman's emphasis is on helping technology companies structure their product lines and businesses with major focus on design and strategy, specifically how designers and design thinking can help drive incremental and radical innovation within the company. Tonight, we have the privilege to engage Don in a discussion about human-centered design, complexity, emotional design, user advocacy, experience design, usability research, and a whole lot more. Topics potentially ranging from household goods to human error and safety. So please join me with a warm round of applause for what is a legend in our chosen career, Mr. Dr. Donald Norman. Thank you. So good evening, Don. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
I'm Brian, in case you didn't hear the intro. I'm just going to lay
It's 80 degrees outside.
It's wet there?
Yes.
Okay.
Not where you are. Where I am.
Well, I was going to say welcome to actually a warm spring evening in Kansas City virtually. So we weren't at 80 today, but we were about 74. So we got pretty close.
So actually, before we start, a usability issue. There are all those people at the bottom left that I can't see because it cuts off. So some of you should move to your right. If you start raising your hand, starting from your left, going one at a time, I'll tell you when I see the first hand.
So there you go. Go.
No, from the far left. The far left of the. I can see all you guys. It's the left people I can't see.
So it's our right. Keep raising your hands.
Well, depends which way you're facing. I'm thinking of the way you are facing.
That's true.
Audience left, okay? The audience left on the second row.
On the second row. Oh.
First person on the aisle, raise your hand. I can't see you. Next person.
Keep going.
Yeah, there you are. So everybody has to move at least that level.
There you go. Slide down. Oh, about 5 seats down, actually.
No, not people in the back. Come on. Just.
And while we're moving, I'm gonna set up a couple things. So Don is graciously agreed to answer questions from the audience. I have a few canned questions up here and questions that have been submitted to me. There are mics laying on the rail back here, and I think a couple gentlemen with mics around. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. We'll get you a mic, and I'll call it out as soon as I see something. Just try to grab my attention. So, Don, just to kick us off, want to have you, as somebody who read the first book many, many, many years ago, was hopeful that maybe you could give us a little context to, for me personally, my question would be, some context to where you were and what you were doing in your life that prompted you to actually write the first book, and then maybe lead that into what was updated in the second book for all of our audience members out here, and what really prompted the update to the book.
Well, that was 25 years ago, and I was a professor, an academic, doing research on how people thought, behaved, acted, attended to the world. And I spent a year on sabbatical in Cambridge, England. Before I left, though, I was studying also accidents and mistakes that people make, human error. And I was working with NASA Ames, that's a NASA in California, on aviation safety. I had taken part in nuclear power reactor examinations and so on. So I was starting to look at the way that people used complex machines and the early computers of those days. Those computers none of you will remember. The mouse did not exist. We had mostly green screens with, I guess they were black screens with green letters. And that was everything. You typed and the letters appeared, and you controlled a computer by typing commands, command language interfaces. And they were pretty miserable. Well, I was though not studying that. I was studying fundamental properties of the human mind. And then I went to England for a year and couldn't work the doors, couldn't work the light switches, couldn't work the water faucets, or as they call them, water taps. They worked in all sorts of weird ways, mysterious ways, each one different than the other. And the most annoying part was that nobody cared. So this got me so annoyed, I sat down and wrote The Psychology of Everyday Things, saying, you know, things have a psychology to them. If you understand them, and if you understand people, you might make, come on, a water faucet. It can't be that hard. You might make it in a way that we could understand, or a light switch, or whatever. Well, that was The Psychology of Everyday Things. Clever title for a book, but I was still an academic. I thought cleverness is what was important. And so POET, Psychology of Everyday Things, poet, bad title for a book. So the publishers explained to me that they were going to change the name to Design of Everyday Things, because people who cared about psychology, they wanted to know why they couldn't get along with their parents or something, and they would never think of reading this book about things. And people who cared about things would never go look in psychology, so call it design. And so I did my very first user research and went out and talked to bookstore managers and bookstore clerks and discovered the publisher was right. So we changed the name of the book. Over time, the book sort of increased in popularity. And I started to become famous for something called a Norman door, a door you can't open, which was really annoying to me. I was kind of pissed. You know, I'd done all this fundamental research on human memory and how we understand things and how we do things, and semantic networks, structures that we could put into machines that could reason and think, the beginnings of artificial intelligence. And the work I was doing was closely related to my friends in AI. And I was becoming famous for doors you couldn't open. But, you know, over time, I came to really enjoy that it turns out that I thought that the impact I have on the world is far more important if you make doors that people can open, or more complex things like computers and everyday devices and airplanes and automobiles that people can actually use. That's actually far more important than the temporary fleeting theories of, say, memory, which, yeah, it does advance the field, but you produce what you do this year, and next year somebody says, oh no, and changes it, and the next year somebody changes that, so that it's a temporary phenomenon. So over the years, I've started to call myself a designer, and I talk more and more to design groups, and I've visited most of the major design schools in the world by now, and visited many companies. So I really am a designer. But also, as I started working in the design field, I got more and more interested in the way the computers were working, or if you would like, not working. And the only company that used it all sensible procedures was Apple. And so I was fascinated by Apple. I was consulting for Xerox PARC and their early Alto computer, the very first graphical user interfaces. And I started consulting for Apple. And pretty soon I realized I was much more interested in what was going on in Silicon Valley than what was going on in the scientific community. And so I left the university and went up to Apple, and eventually became vice president of the Advanced Technology Group. That was kind of neat. A lot of exciting, wonderful people, creative. You know something that's really not good to have too many creative people in a company. The problem with creative people is that they come up with ideas. They always come up with ideas. Today they come up with a brilliant idea and you say, wow, yes, let's make a product out of that. And you get to work and next week they come up with another idea and off they go in another direction. And then a new idea and a new idea. Nothing ever gets shipped. And that's the Apple I was in. It was wonderful and creative and exciting. But even the CEO, who was John Sculley at the time, John Sculley would call me in his office and say, stop everything you're doing, Don. I have a great idea. And I'd say, you said that last week, John. Oh, yeah, but this is a better idea. His ideas were actually pretty clever. He was very good, I thought. But he didn't realize that it would take like 200 or 300 people 2 years to do one of his ideas. And you can't change your mind every week with ideas of that magnitude. So when I joined Apple, it started going downhill. Eventually, Steve Jobs came back, looked over Apple, said it was non-functional. Let's get rid of all the vice presidents, he said. And all the vice presidents got fired, laid off is the technical term. And so that was me. And I laid off some 250 people in my group. And as soon as I left, the stock started going up again. So I'm proud to say I have a big impact on companies. Anyway, I really did enjoy my time in industry. I really did enjoy the fact that I could make products that we could ship and that people could use and that I could see them on the shelves. And as I went around the country and the world for that matter, I could talk to people who use these products, get ideas from them, take them back. They might get introduced into the products. So I didn't want to go back to academics. I got hired by HP, which was a grand mistake. I lasted 1 year at HP. It was a disorganized company. They really liked me, they treated me well, and I couldn't get anything done. And after a year, I quit, and they wouldn't even let me quit. It took over a week for me to convince them that I wasn't doing anything. What good was I? So I left HP, and then I met Jacob Nielsen, who had just left Bell Labs. We knew each other a long time. No, I guess he left Sun Microsystems. And so we decided to start our consulting company, the Nielsen Norman Group, which has been active ever since. Except in the middle, one of my clients hired me away to go to Chicago and start a distance education company teaching MBAs over the internet. That's another long story, which I'll skip. But in the end, I ended up, first of all, at Northwestern in computer science, and then coming back to where I am now, Palo Alto, California, really having fun. I'm traveling around the world. I talk to people around the world. I work with many companies. I've been working with BMW in Munich. I've been working with Toyota and Nissan here in Silicon Valley. I'm working with startups in Hong Kong and India. I'm a visiting professor in Tongji University in Shanghai. I taught at KAIST in Korea for 3 years, 2 months a year for 3 years. I'm working with a wide variety of really fascinating, wonderful companies and people. I'm an IDEO fellow, which means I get to sort of take part a little bit in the IDEO's work. Kind of neat. But the next thing you might ask is, well, why did I rewrite the book? Well, because it's 25 years and the technology has changed dramatically. The principles in the book, with one mild exception, have not changed because the principles are based upon human psychology and the way we interact with stuff. That hasn't changed. But the technology has changed and the way we use it changes. And also, I've learned a lot in those 25 years. I've learned the importance of emotion. I've learned that some of the things that we talked about were difficult for people to understand. And I've also learned, well, the original book started a process which eventually today is called human-centered design. And so I added a chapter discussing human-centered design and why that's the appropriate way to design things. And after I explained all the principles and the proper way to design things, my favorite section of the book is called, "You know what I just told you? It doesn't work that way." And the reason is what I called it Norman's Law. My publisher called it Don Norman's Law. The day the product team is assembled, it's over its budget and behind schedule. Sound familiar? Mm-hmm. All you Cerner folks? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This means that when you tell them, oh, wonderful, a new product, gosh, I can work with you. Let's go out and see how the people in India use it, and the people in England, and the people in Africa, and the people, well, in New York or California. And then we could really do a great job. And if you have a really good product manager, the product manager will say, that's an excellent idea. You really should do that, but you know, our budget's pretty limited and we don't have any time. So I'm sorry, we can't do it. Next time you'll be able to do it right, okay? Well, next time it's the same story. So you never have time to do it right. On top of that, the programmers want to start writing code on day one. And you can go to them and say, but we don't know what we're building yet. And they say, we're behind schedule. I've got to get going. And if it's a mechanical product, a physical product, the mechanical engineers want to start ordering the parts and the dies. And you say, but we don't know what we're building yet. And they say, look, did you know it takes 6 to 9 months to get a die after you've ordered it? We have to order it today. Well, that's life in the company. There's worse parts too, which is that you have a legacy system. You never start from scratch. That's a problem because we always teach you in the classroom relatively small problems, and you always get to invent the problem, or you're giving it to it from scratch, and you get to do your user research, and you get to do your design, and you get to build it, and you say, how nice. In the real world, there's tens or hundreds of people involved in making the product. It takes about 2 years usually to do a normal cycle, and there's already all that stuff out there, and you can't change it very much. Even if you know that it's bad and you know the better way, it turns out you often just can't do it because it doesn't support it. Or because everybody's used to working in a particular way. And if you change the way they're working, they will all complain. So the real world is actually much more interesting than the academic world. And those challenges are actually, they're kind of fun. They're frustrating, they're horrible, they're hideous, you hate them. But actually, that's what makes the job interesting. I actually wouldn't be interested if it weren't challenging and difficult. But I did add 2 chapters at the end of the book explaining what is going on in the real world and trying to talk a little bit about how you might overcome some of these problems. And then one last point, and then I can shut up. Affordances. How many of you use affordances? There they go, the hands are coming up. And how many of you are building physical products, not screens? I see a couple of hands, just a couple. You know, if you're doing screen design, whether it's websites or mobile or medical instruments that are, used on a screen or a tablet, affordances don't make any sense. Because affordance it's a relationship, and that's why it's so difficult to understand. If people don't understand relations. When you say this is an X, they assume you mean an object. This is an affordance. Oh, it must mean this object, or this circle, or this line, or this square, or this handle. And no, the affordance is a relationship. It's, this cup, it affords lifting because my fingers fit in. And it's a relationship between the cup and my body that is the affordance. It affords lifting. It affords throwing. It does not afford completely hiding behind it because it's smaller than my face. But if I were an animal or very small, it would afford hiding. The whole point is the affordance of hiding is a function of the size of the thing you're hiding behind and the size of the thing doing the hiding. Well, on a screen, what kind of the affordances? Maybe you can touch it. Or you can rub it. But you can do it any place. So when designers say, I put a target here, I put a circle, I put an affordance so people know where to tap. That's not an affordance, it's a signal, it's a communication. And actually the most important part of design is not so much the affordances, it's the signals. What's important here is that opening is the signal that I can put something inside. So I introduced the concept of signifiers. It actually comes from semiotics, the field, but it's, I think, more important than affordances. What designers do is they put signifiers that signify what operations you can do and where you can do it. And so that's the one new concept that's introduced in the book. But that brings me to the last point. I know the point I just said was the last point, but here's a new last point. In the early days of computers, we had this invention called the Graphical User Interface, GUI. And what that did was it took away the command lines. The problem with command lines is you had to memorize it. And you walked up to the computer and we had what was known as the blank screen syndrome. You got this computer, you had no idea what you could do. because it all had to be in your head. You had to memorize the commands and type them. We got rid of the commands and we replaced them with menus. So there are the menus, and you click on each menu and it pulls down, and you can see exactly what actions are possible. So when you buy a new program, you could simply go and click on every single menu and read what's possible, and you get a pretty good idea of how the program works and how to use it. Well, we've gone backwards in time. We now have gesture systems, tablets and smartphones, and we have the blank tablet, the idea. Namely, I got the tablet and I'm not sure what to do. Well, I can tap it, or maybe double tap it, or maybe I use one finger or two fingers, or is it three fingers or even four? Do I go up or down or left or right? Or in some cases, do I start in the middle and then go down? Or do I start on the top and go only to the middle and then reverse myself? Or do I start on the side or on the upper right-hand corner? And who knows what you do? There are no signifiers. There are no hints. There are three important concepts in modern computing, in modern usability, which have all been violated. One of them is discoverability, so you know what's possible. The second is feedback, so you know what's happening. And the third is, oh, I didn't mean to do that, undo it. No more undo. No more discoverability. Now, Microsoft in Windows 8 for the phone has done actually a pretty good job. I really like what they've done. And what they do on the screens is they show a little bit of the next screen peeking in over the edges. And that adds a discoverability. You know, there's something on to the right, so I should swipe this to the left so I can see it. That's good. But they still don't have undo, and it's often hard to discover what to do in many cases. And so, well, feedback, recoverability. How many times have you wanted to show somebody a picture, and you take your tablet and you thumb through, and you find the picture, and you hand the tablet to your friend, and they pick it up, and their fingers accidentally hit the glass, and so it disappears, and they say, oh, what did I do? They have no idea what they did. How do you recover? Quite often, you have no idea how to recover. You don't know where you are, how to get back to where you were. And Apple tells you how to recover. Oh, you hit that little button on the bottom and start over again from the beginning. So actually, I think that gestures and tablets and smartphones are in their infancy, and they still suffer. They're a lot more fun to use. For lots of things, they're easier to use, but they add to great confusion. They do frustrate people. And I think that will change. But I think it will take another 4 or 5 years. So that's my preamble. That's the history of design of everyday things, the old version, the new version, and actually where I stand today on modern devices.
Any questions immediately? If not, I have another one. So. All right, I'll ask another one real quick, Brian. Don, you, as a pioneer in artificial intelligence and also as an educator and as a designer, you touched a little bit on this with sort of the design of modern objects, phones, tablets, things of that nature. As an educator of designers and a mentor, where do you, we're very fast moving into an era of no interface at all, if you will, no visual interface, more of a perceptual thing. I walk up to a stoplight, for example, and it knows that I'm there, and it starts beeping automatically and tells me things. So as we think about mentoring and educating designers of the future, for example, what are your thoughts around that? How do we even start approaching that when the experience becomes basically a conglomeration, if you will, of independent objects that are, sort of thrown together in many different environments and expected to be useful? So just thoughts.
Actually, I think it's kind of neat.
Well,
is kind of nice that we get to interact with our objects in a much more lively way, just like we interact with people. Look, when I'm in a crowded city, San Francisco, New York City, and I'm walking down the sidewalk, there's no interface, right? I'm just walking, and all these other people are walking opposite me, and we don't bump into each other. And how is that? Well, because I see them, they see me, they modify their behavior, I modify mine, and most important of all, we try to be consistent. I remember I visited Delft in the Netherlands, and I had to walk from my hotel to the university, and I was given instructions on how to do that. And I was told that when I crossed this empty square in the middle of the city, that was the most dangerous part of a trip, because it felt like tens of thousands of bicycles going in all directions, and I had to walk through them. And the instructions were very simple. Don't try to help them. Just walk straight, and you'll be perfectly fine. That was the interaction. Because if I walked straight, all the bicycles, they saw me. And they assumed I would walk straight, so they altered their course so they would miss me. Some would go in front of me, some would go behind me, to my right, to my left. But if I tried to help them, I saw a bike coming and I would quickly move to the right, it would probably turn to its left to avoid me and therefore crash into me. Or I would crash into the bike behind me that never expected me to dash to the right. So being predictable was the most important thing. Well, as our objects start to have these quasi-intelligences that they're aware that we're there, as long as they're predictable, we'll get along with them just fine. And, it's kind of annoying because these smart objects are really stupid. As you walk down the streets past the grocery stores and the drugstores, the doors all open as you walk by, right? That's because they sense you. And so they say, oh, if somebody's near me, open the door. Well, I had no intention of going in. It didn't distinguish between somebody walking directly to it and somebody just walking along the side and coming by near. But that will change too. And we all know that the doors do this, so we just laugh and keep going. And I actually think it's going to be neat that we won't have physical interfaces. We will have interfaces. The interface is the interaction, the place where I interact with something, the thing between, the boundary between two things. But that interface may be a space. It may be a distance. It may be an action that I do that and it shuts up, my television set mutes, becomes quiet. Or maybe I do this and the picture gets bigger. Or maybe I just walk nearby. Or I put my hand under the faucet and the water turns on. I think that's kind of nice.
Okay. Questions? Got a question in the audience.
But by the way, it's going to cause a great challenge for you as designers because it's not nearly as simple and discrete as somebody just clicking. Just like now the designers of those automatic doors have to say, oh, gee, it's opening all the time when it's not meant to. How can we tell when somebody really wants to come in versus when they're just walking by? That's going to be fun.
Hi, Dr. Norman. A question along those lines. Have you given any thought to how automakers are going to deal with self-driving cars and people stopping paying attention as the cars start driving themselves?
Yes. I even wrote a book about it, Design of Future Things. And I was working with BMW, and that project is over. I'm now working with Toyota and Nissan. Nissan is especially interesting because Nissan in Japan did a demonstration for the Prime Minister, and they took a self-driving car on the test track, and they programmed it to do this circuit around the test track, and they carefully designed it to respond to unexpected events. But the unexpected events were always, reasonably expected. Somebody would run in front of the car, so you didn't know exactly when, but you knew where it was going to happen, and you knew it was going to be a person. And so they put the Prime Minister in the car, and the car without a driver went all around the test track and reacted properly to a few unexpected events. And the Prime Minister was very impressed. Worse, the CEO of Nissan was very impressed. And so he announced that, oh, in 2020, we will release fully automatic cars. Well, in the automobile industry, 2020, it takes 4 or 5 years to release a product. So that means the car better be fully automatic by 2016, and it's now 2014. No way. In California, you're allowed to drive fully automatic cars as long as there's a human in there at the steering wheel to take over when something goes wrong. It's a stupid law. Here's why it's stupid. I'm in an airplane, and the pilots are nothing. The pilot had nothing to do for the last 2 hours. The plane is flying itself, and so they're talking, enjoying whatever they're doing, maybe eating lunch, drinking coffee, and then suddenly something goes wrong, and the plane starts diving to the earth. Well, this has happened a number of times, and the people in the aviation safety industry study all of these incidents because actually there aren't very many. It's such a safe industry, it's very difficult to find accidents to study. So we all know the very same accidents. But what happens here is the pilots all jump up and say, oh shit, what's going on? And they have no idea what's happening. But there are 2 of them. They're extremely well trained. And that plane is 5 or 6 miles up in the air. They have several minutes before they're in real danger. So in all the cases we've studied, the pilots managed to figure it out and pull the plane to safety. Now take the automobile. You're driving along, the car is driving itself. The new Mercedes S-Class, for example, already does that. The new Mercedes, one reporter was very proud of the fact that he drove the new Mercedes S-Class and he didn't pay any attention for 5 whole minutes. He was able to read or do other things for 5 minutes. The Mercedes, to try to be safe, requires you to have a hand on the steering wheel. So if you don't have a hand on the steering wheel, it beeps at you. So, okay, I'm reading my book. I'll keep one hand on my steering wheel while I read my book. So people are not going to pay attention. Doesn't matter what you tell them they have to do. They're not going to pay attention. When something goes wrong in the automobile, you have what? A half second? A second to respond? And drivers are not well trained. Probably none of you is particularly well trained. I suspect none of you are trained nearly as well as airplane pilots. The only people who are really well trained are race car drivers. For example, do you know what to do in case of a skid? Well, yeah, we all read in the book. You're supposed to steer into the direction of the skid. Have you ever practiced it, tried it? Not as easy as it looks. First of all, the direction of the skid almost always means you're pointing towards the edge of the cliff. Second of all, there are 2 different kinds of skids. They didn't tell you that. There's oversteer and understeer, which actually means it's your front wheel skidding or your rear wheel skidding. And what you do is different in those 2 cases. And it's dangerous. It's going to be dangerous. So I think self-driving cars are coming. There's only, we will have solved 80, 90, even 95% of the issues in the next couple of years. That last 5% is going to be hard. But they are coming. What I think is the most difficult part is the intermix, when we'll have some cars that are manual and some cars that are self-driving. Even when they are all self-driving, it's going to be a difficult problem because look at the age difference among cars. Some cars are, 10, 15 years old. So even though they're all self-driving, a 15-year-old technology is trying to drive along with the modern technology, and that's a huge difference in technological ability. So all the cars are going to have to be talking to each other and figuring out, how good are you? What do you know? While they try to maneuver. I also think there's going to be some public problems that the accident rate now is we kill roughly 40,000 people a year in the United States. We injure roughly 6 million every year. We kill several million a year in the world. We start putting automated driving. The death rate in the United States will drop from its 40,000 to maybe just a couple hundred. But that couple hundred is apt to come in one accident, just like an aircraft. So you have an accident that suddenly involves 100 cars or people dying. oh my goodness, we should never have this automated stuff. And they'll pass all sorts of laws and all sorts of regulations. And forgetting that we've actually saved some 30,000 people a year, 40,000. So there are very many technical problems, and that the automobile makers are clueless. Here's the problem, the usability field. I've watched this over and over again. Every new field has to learn the lessons all by themselves. The aviation safety people, they were the first. They did really great job, such a great job in commercial aviation that we went for 3 years without a single commercial accident. Nobody died. Nobody was injured for 3 years. And then we had 2 accidents in a row, but we haven't had any since then. There's hardly any accidents. So we learned a lot, and when we tried to take those lessons and go and teach the computer manufacturers who were in the early days making unfathomable stuff, they said, well, you know, computers aren't the same as airplanes. Those principles don't apply. Well, the principles do apply, but it took a while. But eventually the computer manufacturers and the software industry is now the leader in doing usability studies and user experience. So the nuclear power industry, same problems. We've given lectures in the nuclear power industry and they say, no, we're different. I once gave a lecture to the Japanese nuclear power people and they all laughed and smiled. And I even used examples from American nuclear power incidents. And they all said, no, no, in Japan, we don't have those problems. We did it better than the Americans. We will never have an incident. Well, not only have they had now a really major incident, but they were lying even then. They never had an incident that was publicized, but they lied about every incident they ever had. They wouldn't admit it. Well, the first step into making something better is to admit that you're having trouble. To admit that you have problems so you can fix them, you understand them. I'm now working with the medical industry. I'm on a great big project in University of Texas, Houston Medical Center on electronic medical records. And those systems are pretty bad, really bad. Sorry, Cerner. Actually, we're working closely with the vendors. It's the researchers, the practitioners, the hospitals. It's a really massive project. We have 3 of the major vendors there as well. And Cerner is well represented. And actually, I think the vendors are doing a good job. The vendors have a problem, though, is that they have these massive systems and they're very difficult to change. And on top of that, every hospital is different and everyone uses different procedures and different rules and different ways of doing things. And then we have some onerous regulations, the worst being HIPAA, which is a privacy regulation. But if you're a nurse and you're trying to use a system and you get interrupted, and nurses get interrupted about every 2 minutes. So a nurse almost never finishes an action without being interrupted a few times. You get interrupted and you turn away and you come back and the system has logged you out. That's because of the privacy requirements. They're so concerned if you're not using it, somebody else might come up and see a private record. So I've seen nurses writing the information down on their hands. We use computers to avoid handwriting errors and they write it on their hands. Why do you do that? Because I get logged off all the time. I need to know what the numbers are. Or when I go into the patient's bed, I need to know the data and I don't have a computer there. It's a hard problem. And the medical industry, the physicians in the hospitals, when they hear of these other industries and we tell them about it, they say, oh, but medicine is different. Well, I've seen that now in the automobile industry. We tell them about user experience things. We did a whole project for one of the major companies explaining how to do user experience design, because if you buy a modern car, especially the expensive luxury ones, you cannot work the controls. And if you have that experience, the more money you pay for the car, the less likely you can use it because they have all these features. I have a new car that has automatic parallel parking. I've only done it once because I can never remember how to turn it on. My car has cameras all around it. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 cameras. And so it gives you 3 different views on the big screen. One is when you back up, it gives you a view of what's behind you. Very nicely done. If you like, you can put it into a view that shows you it as if there was a camera above the car looking down. So you can see the car and everything all around you. They do that by stitching together the pictures from all 8 cameras. And they also have a peekaboo feature. They have 2 cameras, one on the front left fender, one on the front right. So if you're coming out of a narrow driveway, you can just look at those cameras and you can see what's to the left and right of you. 3 different views, all of them valuable, all of them pretty well done, and 2 buttons to control them. And so I could never get the one I want. I could never figure out what the combination of buttons is that gives it to me. And so why didn't they make it 3 buttons? Or why didn't they make it 1 button? 1 button would be better, because I could say, push it, no, that's wrong. Push it, no, that's wrong. But yeah, that's it. Really simple. I've tried to explain it to them, and they keep saying, oh, we didn't put 3 buttons. We saved some money by not having a 3rd button. Well, then how about having 1 button? We'd save even more money. No. 2 is the worst that you could possibly imagine. But again, every industry has to learn this by itself. So if we can't even get the control of the cameras right, the question was, when we get self-driving cars, are we going to get the interaction between the person and the car right? And the answer is no. It's really bad. The car takes control, or the person takes control, or they fight each other.
All right, Don, we have another question in the audience, please.
So, Dr. Norman, it's a great pleasure to meet you and get an opportunity to ask you a question. I'm tasked with educating the next generation of UX practitioners. What is the one key skill that you think that they should have?
Empathy. You have to understand the people you're designing for. That means you have to go out and live with them and watch them and understand them. And that's not easy to do. A lot of people, either if you're using an agile design method, you may not have time. Or the reasons I mentioned before, you're over your budget, behind schedule, you may not have time. And it's much easier to go and ask people what they want or what they need, or where they get confused. And that's not it, because with people don't know where their problems are and what they really need. You have to watch. You have to do it. In product land, we call it eating your own dog food, which means you have to also use your own product to understand how it works. But I think that's really the most important. And even if you don't have time, you can do it anyway. You can be doing it between projects. You can be doing it in your spare time. And eventually you learn to understand their issues. Now, you also have to have empathy for the other people in your company. Too often the design team, the UX team thinks, well, this is what's really important. Those damn engineers, they always ruin it. Or the marketing people, they don't get it, they ruin it. Well, that's assuming that the programmers are dumb and they're ruining it on purpose, or the marketing people are dumb and they're ruining it on purpose. But I have a rule, which is, don't criticize until you understand the other point of view. That's another kind of empathy. So why do programmers ruin what you've given them? Or maybe because they didn't understand the reasons, so they didn't realize they were making a change. Or maybe because what you gave them couldn't be done, or it wasn't easy to do, or it didn't fit the variety of equipment they had. So if you start working with the engineers, the programmers, while you're doing the design, you might understand their issues, and they will understand yours. They will begin to understand why you did things the way you did it. And then the marketing people, same issue. That marketing has to sell the product. So marketing and UX often get into fights about who owns the customer. And my answer is you both do. That marketing has to sell something, and usability, UX people trying to fulfill their real needs. And those are different things. And so again, we have to have empathy for the marketing problem and help them. And sometimes we may weaken usability to make better sales. And my favorite story on this is a Sony radio. Recently encountered it at a hotel I was in. And it has a big button on top. And I forget the exact wording on the button, but basically the button says better sound. Now, why would you add a button, an extra button that makes it look more complicated that says better sound? If you could really do better sound, why not have it there all the time? Because how are people to know that it's better, and why would make them buy it in the store? It's much better that you have this thing that announces to everybody we have better sound, and so people can use, they will use that button once, right? They'll push it and say, oh, it is better, and they'll push it again, oh, that's worse, and they'll push it again, oh, it is better, and they'll never touch it again. But they'll feel good. So that's something that a usability person would say it's stupid, and a marketing person would say is essential. And once again, we have to understand that we're trying to find their fundamental needs. They're trying to get things, trying to understand what makes people buy. And they're different. We don't want to interview because people will tell you what they think or what they think they ought to think or what they think you might want them to say. We ought to watch them. Well, they use interviews and focus groups all the time because actually what people think is often much more related to what they buy. They don't buy what they actually need. They buy what they think they ought to buy. So again, we have to learn to be, I think learning to work with other people, our customers, and the other people in our team. And the next question, you're in UX, you want to design for your customers. Who are your customers? Somebody has to repeat the answer. I can't hear them.
Somebody said the end user.
Right, the end user. Who is your customer? You're saying who is the product's customer. Who is your customer?
The business.
Sorry, I can't understand it.
The business is one.
The business. It's your boss. It's actually not your boss. Your boss understands you. It's your boss's boss, or maybe the boss of your boss's boss. And if you work for a client, it's the person who hired you, or maybe their boss. And so I actually say a good strategy if you work in a consultancy is your job is to get the person who hired you promoted. Which means you have to understand what's important to them and their company. And when you're trying to design something within a company, you have to understand what the requirements of the company are, not what the UX requirements are, but the company. And you understand better what's going on in the company, you'll actually give more value to the company, and you're much more likely to get your ideas accepted. Because in the end, we're not designing UX, and the programmers are not designing program code or something. We're designing a product that is to be used, and we need to take a larger scale approach. So that's another version of empathy. So my answer is very simple, just one word, empathy.
Another question?
I want to go hit the back button to the designing for things and the no interface movement and get your reactions to cultural challenges and maybe the long view of where this is going, specifically around this case study. So if you look at Xbox, and we're designing with gestures, designing in space. And now there's this internationalization of gestures. There's more information to think about. It's not regional. We're not thinking about unique audiences, global in nature. And the ramifications of getting a gesture wrong when you place a product in an American market versus an Asian market is now much more dramatic. So as things, this no gesture no interface, more gesture movement takes off, I'm curious on where is internationalization and UX merging, and where does all this end up?
Well, I think gestures are going to be a disaster. Gestures are really hard. They're hard to learn. You're not sure where to do it. It's hard to be specific about the precise nature of this gesture. When you're not constrained, I think buttons, physical buttons and knobs really constrain you to you know what you're touching and you know what you can do. You can turn it or push it a certain amount. When you have a screen and the gestures are on the screen, that also constrains you. Constrains sort of, where the hand is located and how far it can go in any direction. When you have gestures in free space, it's much more complex. How many gestures can we learn in free space especially? I think it's in the order of 5. 10? I don't think so. I heard a wonderful talk by a Microsoft engineer about the gestures and what they were doing. And he, in the talk, said, you know, most of the Microsoft engineers who work on tablets do not know all the gestures that are available on their own tablets. I bet many of you don't know the gestures available on your own computers. I mean, Apple has this nice control panel, which you have to go to periodically to remind yourself. It goes these little animated. I'm showing you what you can do on the touch screen, or you know how to move, or what the operations are, and it's really hard to remember. And you know, even the iPod, it has a little thing coming out of the earphone, right? And it has little buttons. It has 3 buttons. So this isn't even gestures, but 3 buttons. First of all, I discovered people who didn't know there were 3. It looks like 2. There's a button here and a space and a button there. Oh, actually, the middle one is a button. Oh, what does the middle one do? Well, you push it once and it starts the music or stops it. You push it twice, well, it advances to the next song. You push it 3 times, oh, it backs up to the previous song. You push it twice and hold it, and it goes fast forward. You push it 3 times and hold it, and it goes fast reverse. Did any of you, do you all know that? I saw people looking at each other. Did you all know that? Now, when the phone rings, what do? You push it once, and it answers the phone. And you push it twice, and it, I don't remember what happens. And if you don't want to answer the phone, you want to go away, you know, you do something, and I've forgotten at this point what you do. So even with just something as simple as 3 buttons, it does 20 or 30 things. Who can remember them all? And gestures? And internationalization of gestures? No way. First of all the companies are patenting them. And when you start patenting, it's all hell breaks loose, because the gestures that work with one company won't work with the other. They're not allowed to work with the other. And second of all, you know, Apple has tried to do this. It really makes me angry. They try to patent the little squeeze to make the thing smaller and big to make it bigger. Those have been around for 20 years. When the iPhone and iPad first came out, brilliant revolution in gestures. Well, gestures had been around for 20 years at that point. They were in the research labs, and most design places around the world had a great big gesture tablet made by Mitsubishi. But so a lot of the basic things, thank goodness, were already out there in the world. Otherwise, everything would be patented. And so first of all, there's the patent problem. And second of all, there's the obscenity problem. What's nice in one country is an obscene gesture in the next country. You know, even the distance that we stand from each other varies dramatically from country to country. Here's another example I like. Looking for my remote control. Here, get one. Boom, 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 boom. Disappeared. So here we go. A remote control, right? So I'm giving a talk, and I have this really nice thing with 4 buttons, and which one controls the slides? Well, let's suppose for the moment it's these 2, horizontal. So if I'm giving a talk and I want the next slide, how many of you think I pushed the left one? How many think I pushed the right one? Now, if I were in Israel or in an Arabic country, what do you think the answer would be? The opposite. So Arabic and Hebrew are written right to left, not left to right. And so it's we write left to right, so you think the next slide is to the right. Now, what about if we use the top and bottom buttons? How many of you think to get the next slide I hit the top button? How many of you think I hit the bottom button? How many of you can't believe that somebody else thought the opposite? So why? So left and right is culturally sensitive, but we can predict it. Top and bottom. So why do some people think the top advance gets you to the next slide and the bottom? The answer is this. First of all, the way this maps, top, bottom, if I tilt it down like, well, if I tilt it like this, the top button is the forward button and the bottom button is the backward button. And that's pretty universal, okay? Top is that direction and back is this direction. But now here's the question. What is moving? So I'm giving a talk and I have all these slides lined up in front of me, okay? Now I want the next slide. If I hit the top button to get the next slide, what I really mean is I move forward. I'm here at this slide, I'm now going to move forward to the next slide. And now I'm going to move forward to the next slide. So I hit the top button. But suppose it's the slides that come to me. Well, I've gotten this slide and I want the next one. Come on, come on. So I move the bottom button. I'm saying, come now, the next slide to me. So does that match your notion of why you thought top and bottom? That isn't even cultural. Because I first encountered this in Asia and I said, oh, it's an Asian thing. Asians all think that the bottom means come to me. So I asked the audience and no, half and half, thought just like you did. And so I've started now to ask this question around the world, and everybody is split, half and half, roughly. So gestures are not only cultural, but in some cases it's a function of how you view the world, and that's not even cultural. So I think gestures are going to be a real problem. They're going to be great fun for some things, and simple gestures, this always means more. And you know what? This means more. And that means louder, that means brighter. But what else? That's about the only really universal gesture I can think of. All the rest are learned. And this is only universal because more, you piled more stuff and the pile gets higher. Now they're going to be fun and there are going to be more and more of them. And if we could all standardize and learn, we could all learn 10 or 15. I don't think we could learn more than that, but 10, order of magnitude, we could learn, and that would simplify lives. But I don't see that happening because of the patent wars.
One more question, Don?
All right. It's a pleasure. You touched a little bit on the different constraints that impact what we can do and how we're somewhat restricted from doing things by the book. And I come across this all the time. We project managers, executives, stakeholders, product managers, we all tend to expect too much, and then we're all equally surprised every single time that we don't finish as much as we wanted to. It's overrun, costs are over, time is over, and we don't have time to do UX properly. So your thoughts, what is it, in the spirit of, in order to fix things, we have to understand them. What is it psychologically that causes us to engage in this magical thinking over and over? Thank you.
I don't know. There's a kind of optimism we all have, and I think it's probably good. There are several traits that I think are in some sense negative, but they're good. I mean, everybody thinks that what they're working on is the most important part of the product. And that's also what causes a lot of the fights, because UX is more important than the programming, which is more important than the marketing, which is more important than whatever, than the packaging, or than this or that. And I think, you have to believe what you're doing is the most important thing. Why would you do it otherwise? But it does lead to these kinds of problems. We also tend to think that it doesn't matter how much experience we have, we still think we can do it in less time than it really takes. And that's probably true of everything. It's probably true of everything in your own private, personal lives as well. And this means when there's, when you start the new product, not only are people over optimistic, but the product managers and the executives are constrained by schedule and by money, and they want you to do it faster than you want to do it. And you're trying to be helpful. You're trying to do your best. So you often admit that, okay, yes, we'll manage it somehow. And so it's more than you can do. And then all sorts of unexpected things happen, like people get sick, or somebody quits, or somebody gets promoted. And so they leave, and you have to bring a new person in. And first of all, it takes a week or two to find a new person, and then it takes them a few weeks to learn what was going on. And they don't learn it all ever because the person who left took it all with them inside their heads. It wasn't written down. So there are all these unexpected things that they're expected, but they're unexpected when they happen. So I just think we tend to be optimistic, and that gets us in trouble. But, you know, I'd rather have us all be optimistic than always going around being pessimistic and truthful. So this has been going on, as far as I know, since projects ever started. Probably the building of the pyramids in Egypt was always behind schedule. I think it's just the way it is. I have no solution to it, because I've encountered it myself and fallen prey to this myself. I have some things I recommend to people. One is, when you're doing creativity, you want people to be happy and no constraints. Bring them in the morning, feed you well, always have free coffee and food. When the project itself starts, you decide what you want to do, then I will actually make you anxious. I don't want you happy. I want you anxious. I want to give you a deadline that's a little bit shorter than even you think you need. Because anxiety, when you're happy, floods the brain with hormones that makes you very sensitive to things happening in the environment. So you can say, oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Oh, I have a new idea. Oh, what about that? It's really great for creativity, but it's really horrible to get anything done. You're somewhat scatterbrained. And when, though, you have some tension, not too much extreme, but a little bit of pressure on you, a different set of hormones comes in and makes you focused. You don't see what's happening around you. It's tunnel vision. And that actually makes you more efficient in getting work done. And so it's interesting, too, that in the project, we have to vary from one mode to another mode to get the stuff done.
Do you have time for one more, Don?
Yeah,
Okay, very good.
it's 5:30. I'm free.
Okay.
So my question is, with the way technology is advancing, I feel that there's one important factor a lot of people are forgetting, is that we have a growing older population. And with the devices becoming more and more complex, with, like you said, if we are moving towards a more gesture-based technology, will this actually cater to the older population? Because if you consider countries in Asia, which have a very declining population rate, especially countries like Japan and Korea, and with a very increased amount of older population, would that be a problem in the future? And are we catering to their solutions?
Well, as a very old person, I always get annoyed when I'm told that us old people need special attention. Because I usually then ask, so how old do the people are you worried about? And you'll say, oh, 60, 65. They're young. The issue is really not physical age. The issue, I believe, is it's a sort of mental agility and how much you're willing to try out new things. That the one thing I do is I'm always on top of new technology. It's important in the way I work. It's important for me to know what's going on. It's important for me to work with people of all ages and cultures all the time. When a new device comes out or a new kind of website, I try it. So I'm a member of all sorts of social networks, and I have all these extra devices. I have, you can't see it, but way over there in the corner, there's a great museum of old stuff that I don't know what to do with. But I can understand what happens. There was a time when I just didn't ever want to learn another word processor. It's actually still here. I'm really not up to date on the latest version of Word. Why? Because in my life, I probably learned 20 or 30 word processors. I started in the very early days when there barely were any. And I learned a word processor called VI and a word processor called Emacs. And I even developed a word processor myself over a period of a year. But every year, a new word processor, a new set of commands, a new this. Then when I learned Bravo, which was done at Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center, and the guy who did it, Charles Simonier, quit PARC and went off to the startup in the north. And lo and behold, a few years later, out came Microsoft Word, which was Xerox PARC Bravo. And but yet it was somewhat different, so I had to learn it. And then it came out with a new version. I had to learn it. And a new version, had to learn it. And a new version, I lost track of all the versions and don't know them all. And at this point, I don't care. I'm not going to learn another one. Programming languages, I must know 20 programming languages. You know, it gets awfully tiring after a while. You start off with assembly code, and then and then what? Fortran and Algol and COBOL and Snowball and Lisp and the various versions of Fortran, and then C and C++, minus Sharp. So, you know, there's a limit. So you give up. So I have a feeling a lot of the older people have just given up. And the other thing is that you're afraid of breaking things. And so kids learn these things quickly because they play with it all the time, and they kind of figure out what does what. And they do break it. And we're afraid of breaking, so we don't play and experiment so much, which is why we don't learn it. So first of all, I think it has to do more with the kind of person you are than how old you are. Second, you know, those old systems are pretty clumsy. The command language ones once you know the commands, it's powerful and wonderful and fast, but you got to keep up to date with them. If you learn a language like Lisp, or for that matter, Unix shell, every year they add more commands and more routines and more this. The Lisp you could learn it with one little book, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And today the Lisp manual is about 6 feet long. And the same if you look at the Unix manuals, they used to be a book or two, and now they're 6 feet long. Who can keep up? Well, the new gesture systems are actually easier for many people. So you will find that many older people pick up the tablet and say, oh, I can use it. Now, it turns out they can't use everything, and they do get confused and lost, but they can do much more than they ever were able to do with the other machines because there is less of a learning hurdle. They're not very effective for doing deep work, but lots of people who have not been continually up to date with technology don't need to do the kind of detailed work that you as professionals do. So the iPad and the iPhone and the Android phones and pads are really entertainment devices, and that's what most people want. I can read my email. It's harder to type them, but I can read them. And I can look at photographs, and I can even take them and send them, and I can look at websites. And I think it actually is better for the older people. Many of you must have experienced it for the first time your grandmother had a machine she could use. So I think we do have to worry about the changes in population, but I'm not too concerned that the new technology is going to shut them out. I am more concerned that it's going to shut out people with handicaps. So keyboard shut out people who didn't have hands or whose hands were disabled or numb and they couldn't do it. So it was really good to get speech recognition in. Graphical user interfaces shut out people who were blind until we developed screen readers, and even they are difficult to use. Gesture systems, especially ones that require some precise motion where you have to tap the tiny little button, are really bad for elderly people or people with muscular difficulties, which could be anybody if you sprain your hand or hurt yourself. And so we have systems that are difficult if you're blind or if you're deaf or if you have motor control problems or just plain vision problems. So for all these people, we have to devise multiple ways of doing any task. But I think as soon as we start thinking about all the limitations that even normal people face, many of us have bad eyesight, or many of us will temporarily break an arm or sprain an arm or have an ear infection like I did for a while and I couldn't hear out of the left ear. Or have difficulties. I think the elderly will just come along with it, because as you get older and you have more difficulties and more medical issues, well, they automatically are compensated for if we've done universal design for everybody. So, yeah, I think that there isn't a technology that bothers me about them. Now, as you also know, there's a big industry trying to say, oh, we can automate healthcare, or we can automate taking care of the elderly. And the Japanese love to have little robots that go on, that can be petted and picked up and respond to people. And so we'll yet to see where that goes. But it's not the new technology that bothers me. It's trying to understand the real needs of society. That's what bothers me.
Dr. Norman, we had you scheduled till about quarter of. If you're comfortable to keep going with a couple of questions, we can ask a few more questions, but we do want to respect your time.
You don't see me?
All
That
right,
looks
any
like
more
a universal
questions?
gesture for lay it on me.
We do have a question in the back.
Norman. My name is Nagar, and I'm actually a student of Dr. Elliott's, who asked a question earlier. And my question is kind of a follow-up on the student side. Do you feel like, so looking at your background, you have a very diverse background, engineering, psychology, and design. Do you find value in getting our current students as diverse, or maybe even near as diverse in those areas?
Absolutely. Design is a multidisciplinary occupation. You really have to understand how everything comes together as a system. So I've written quite a bit about this, about how design education must change. I have a recent article in, of all places, LinkedIn. LinkedIn has articles. I didn't ever understood that, but they told me, could I write articles for them? And I said, who would ever read them? Well, my article on stupid smart stuff has been read by 65,000 people. My article on how design education must change been read by about 25,000 at this point. Interesting. If you're designing, you really are a generalist, because what you have to do is understand people and understand the technology. If you're a designer, you have to understand the interaction technology, but also if you're a graphic designer, you have to understand how it looks and the appearance and the legibility, the importance of signifiers. So you have to know at least design and interaction principles, which come from psychology, and technology and business. So you really, I think of design as kind of applied social sciences plus art plus the technology plus business. And the more you know about these, the more effective you can become. And the more effective you'll be in the company too. Because if you understand what the business issues are, you might make different design choices. And if you understand the marketing issues, you might make different design choices. If you understand the technology, you might be able to take advantage of it or work better with the technical people. And if you the people who are straight UX designers often are not great designers. You understand interaction, but so you use people with the design training, but you all have to work together. So right now in design schools, it's mainly you learn a skill. You learn drawing. You learn to draw straight lines and circles and rectangles and two-dimensional drawing. And then you graduate to three-dimensional drawing. And then you graduate maybe to materials, and you learn to form things and put together, and you develop these wonderful craft skills. But that isn't enough to make a product. You also have to know about technology and business and people. So yeah, I think the more you know, the better. Now, you can't become expert in everything. Nobody's expert about everything, but you should know the fundamentals enough so you know what's important and you know who to turn to when you need more specialized knowledge. So the most important field to make friends in, I think, is marketing, because marketing and UX share, even though you often fight with one another, you actually share a lot of values. And then the programming staff, the technical people, and the business people, and actually the marketing is the on-road to business. Yeah, I think you should know it all. Or at least so in the article I wrote with Scott Clemmer, who has a degree from RISD in graphic design and also a degree in computer science from Berkeley. He's a faculty member at UC San Diego. He and I wrote this article together, in which we really argued that with modern design, since everything has a microprocessor, more and more things have displays, and all the advanced sensors that are coming about, you do have to know a little bit about all these different disciplines.
Hello? There we go.
Yes.
Assuming that you did not already answer this question when you discussed empathy, could you please expound on the role of emotion in user experience design? And if you have time, a second question. What is one thing I could do in my job tomorrow to be more innovative in the face of the constraints that we have already identified in this conversation? Thank you so much.
Well, there's no way I'm going to tell you the role of emotion. I mean, I wrote a whole book about that one. But let me just point out that emotion and cognition work hand in hand. They are both essential in our lives, that we don't function well without either, without both. That, think of it this way, emotion assigns value to things. Cognition tries to understand and predict. But assigning value is critical. And making products that are emotionally pleasing makes a big difference in our acceptance. We usually buy products based on an emotional impact. I mean, one of my examples is the bounce on a smartphone or tablet. You have a big long list, maybe it's your contact list, names, or something you're scrolling and you scroll. Well, first of all, the way an engineer would normally do it is you would put the fingers on the screen and you would come down and it would move, and then you took your finger away and it would stop. So vump, 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 vump. And I don't know who invented it, but somebody came up with the notion of momentum. That when I move it, no, to keep moving. But you don't want it to move forever. So someone invented viscous friction, so it slows down gently. Now, what happens when it reaches the end of the screen? When it reaches the end of the list? Well, actually, the early versions of Firefox, when you reached the end of the list, it went plump, it just stopped. And the people at Apple, I think they're the ones who invented it, said, no, it should bounce. Now, those of you who study usability, what is the usability of the bounce? The answer is zero. It has no function whatsoever. But I love it. You may like it. It makes it more pleasurable. And how many times do you sit there with nothing better to do and you're at the end of the list, so you take your fingers and you pull it down just a little bit. You want to see how far you can pull it before it bounces up again. Well, that's whoever devised this is an artist, really. You understood intuitively what makes pleasure in people. And that's a wonderful emotional thing. And this emotion is very powerful and very important for lots of reasons. It's actually, there is my book, Emotional Design, but in the new version of Design of Everyday Things, I also added what I had learned about emotion to show how it interacted with the general principles that were in the earlier book, which didn't mention it. And the second question was, I forgot it already. Can you give me 2 or 3 words that will remind me?
It was what can be done tomorrow to enhance creativity given the pre-identified constraints?
You're stuck in your job, and here I'm going to go back and I'm going to work tomorrow and I'm going to be more innovative. Well, there are several issues. First of all, one of them is that don't be too innovative, because once you're working within a constraint of a product and the way everything else is done, if something is innovative, and even if it's better but different from the rest, it actually makes the system work worse. So what's really important in a system is consistency. And even though this has been true forever, that apps or applications on your PC or Mac, if they work differently than others, it doesn't matter if it's better. If it works differently, it's not good. It's disturbing. You have to remember it. That being said, the way I like to be innovative is, first of all, don't learn too much about the topic. You're most innovative when you're ignorant. So if you take a traditional designer, like in a design firm, so I work with IDEO, and here's what happens. A new client comes in with a new problem, and there's design teams assigned on it. And there may be some people, maybe it's electronic medical records, who knows? And some people are assigned on it who have no clues to what this is all about. So they have to learn. How do you learn? Well, you might go out and try some systems. You might go out to the local hospitals. We're loaded with hospitals around here. Find someone who uses Cerner, get permission to watch them use it, try to understand it. Find somebody who uses a different brand, and so on. Or you just bring in people and ask them to teach you what's going on. But you ask questions. And you're going to ask some stupid questions along the way. And that's the secret to being innovative. Asking stupid questions. What is a stupid question? A stupid question is one that everybody says, oh, come on, that's obvious. Okay. Why is it obvious? Well, gee, I mean, we've always done it that way. Well, why is that? I don't know. So if you can somehow get yourself in the state of mind where you question the most basic assumptions, that's what often leads to the most important innovations. We don't question our basic assumptions. When you start questioning them, you start to say, oh, wait a minute, maybe it doesn't have to be done that way. And that's where the innovations come from. So don't be afraid to ask stupid questions.
All right. We have taken up enough of your time, and we have all benefited tremendously from the time spent with you. So thank you very, very, very much. And we... And hopefully we can do this again soon sometime. So thank you again. Have a lovely evening and go enjoy a nice dinner.
I will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Brian, I also want to thank you for your time and facilitating this tonight. You did great work. And Will, good job with the mics.
You want me back?
Everybody who had a question tonight, thank you so much for standing up there. We just have a little bit of chapter news to cover. I think we can do this in about 10 minutes or less, so if you just bear with us. We're going to talk a little bit about the future. We had some really good news this morning. We have programming figured out all the way through and including October, so that's kind of exciting. So if somebody wants to clap this, okay, you can do that. The October event, I was able to put up on the site this morning. The site was hacked. You may have followed that on the social media feeds. John was our valiant knight in shining armor and was able to secure the site. And actually, it rose like a phoenix. It actually looks even and works better than it did before. So, John, thank you very much. The October event is going to be a pairing, not like cheese, unfortunately, but a pairing with Boulevard. And we're going to have we're going to have Peyton, Boulevard's lead designer, talk about experience design in the context of beer labels. We don't know exactly how that's going to come together right now. And if we play our cards right, we might be able to have it done at Boulevard, but I can't promise that. So I'm very excited about that. That said, for Cinco de Mayo, we're going to have a wonderful event at Use Agility with Ryan, and he's going to be covering iOS 7 and UX design for that. Use Agility will also be sponsoring a Mexican feast, so don't worry about dinner that night. For June, we have Stephen Huber. He's going to be talking about touch interfaces, and that's going to be at VML. For July, we're trying to get together a I like to call them drinky social events because that's a fun little title. But basically, we want to get a bunch of UX people together in a bar or restaurant. If anybody has any ideas or recommendations for where that should be, let us know. We'll put together a survey because that's how we roll. We'd like to do the well. They're kind of pricey. So just let us know. And you can do that. You can be a UXPAKC hero. You're all heroes tonight. All of you. Even you and you too. But you can be that if you just complete the post-event survey, maybe drop us an email. Let us know your thoughts about tonight. For instance, I realized that I gave Will the wrong link, and that's why the buggers are going kind of funky up there at the top. I should have linked to the PDF, not the PowerPoint. So we're learning, we're making mistakes. That's how this works. We're a startup, I guess. Quick outputs from our last event. Folks thought 45 minutes was like pretty much perfect for mingle time, so we tried to do that tonight. That's why we changed it to a start time of 5:45. People liked the panel concept in terms of what we did, but not necessarily how we did it. So we're going to work on that a little bit. The key quote that summed it up was, "I like the panel, but prefer panels to discuss a topic instead of individually presenting." I don't disagree. Doing so facilitates deeper thought and collaboration. So that's something for us to learn from. If you have any comments or insights about tonight, let us know. And with that, we have winners. Well, there's a... Did this come from Delft too? Because it's Delphian, and it's Delft Blue. I worked for 2 Dutch companies. So, all right, we have a couple of raffle winners. So we're going to do the older book first. And if you have a ticket, the first one is 471344. That's 47. It's Twan. Twan, is it you or? 471344. Twan's a big winner of the vintage copy of the Design of Everyday Things. All right. I work with him, but that does not mean I rigged this. My wife is an ethicist. She does ethics professionally. All right, next ticket, 471343. Oh my gosh. That would be Twan's spouse. So that's Kim. Now, to be fair, there was like a dozen tickets in here, so y'all had good odds. We're going to do this a little bit differently next time, too. I think if we have another large crowd, we'll do door prizes. If anybody has any suggestions or leads on any sort of, I don't know, raffle items, just let us know. So with that, we still have some beer left, and frankly, that's criminal. You guys, you're not really pulling your weight. You got to do something about that. So enjoy some beer. I don't know, is the beer not allowed in the Cerner UX lab? Probably it's okay. That works for me. All right, so the UX Lab, if you haven't seen it before, check it out. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty unique when it comes to UX Labs. Is there a person they should walk with?
Yes.
Yes.
If everyone who wants to go to the UX Lab tour, I would suggest gathering at that side of the auditorium, then we'll go from there.
All right, you heard the man, or did you hear the man? All right, everybody go over there, and then we'll head out in like a caravan. So thank you for coming tonight. If you have any questions, talk to the UX leads. It's John, myself, Will, Amanda. Thank you.